History is not a steady march forward, but a story of brilliant sparks that go dark. This is the journey of 15 ancient inventions we lost and had to reinvent, a testament to the fragile nature of human knowledge. You will discover the incredible stories of technologies so advanced they baffle modern science, and the sobering reasons they vanished for centuries. How did a concrete recipe that lasts 2,000 years simply disappear? What secret in a master violin's varnish can no longer be heard? By the end, you will see our past in a startling new light, understanding how easily progress can unravel and what that means for our future today. What forgotten marvel do you believe is still waiting to be found? The fragility of progress becomes clear when we see how entire libraries of human ingenuity can vanish overnight. A single catastrophic event, a prolonged period of conflict, or even a slow societal shift can sever the chain of knowledge transmission, plunging advanced techniques into darkness for generations. The legendary Library of Alexandria serves as a powerful symbol of this vulnerability. Its vast collections, representing the accumulated wisdom of the ancient world, were lost in a series of fires, scattering irreplaceable texts on everything from engineering to medicine to the winds of history. This was not merely the loss of books, it was the silencing of countless voices of innovation. Similarly, the intricate road networks, aqueducts, and administrative systems of the Roman Empire did not disappear in a day, but eroded over centuries as the central structure that maintained them fragmented. The practical knowledge of how to mix a specific mortar or survey a perfect aqueduct path faded from common practice, becoming the stuff of legend. These gaps in our historical record are not empty spaces. They are active absences where we know something profound was known, but the precise method of its creation has slipped away. This cyclical pattern of discovery, loss, and rediscovery reveals a sobering truth. Human advancement is not a straight line climbing ever upward. It is more like a spiral where we sometimes circle back to relearn what our ancestors once mastered, simply because the social and cultural conditions needed to preserve that knowledge collapsed. Understanding this cycle is essential, as it frames every lost invention not as a random accident, but as a casualty of history's turbulent tides. With this backdrop of fragility in mind, we can begin to examine the first of these remarkable rediscoveries, a material so durable it has silently endured for millennia while its formula was forgotten. The sea itself seemed to catch fire. For the sailors of the 7th century facing the Byzantine navy, there was no more terrifying sight than the weapon known as Greek fire. A sticky, liquid flame that clung to wood and sails. It could not be extinguished by water. In fact, it appeared to burn even more fiercely upon it. Projected from bronze tubes mounted on the prows of warships, this ancient napalm turned the Mediterranean into a blazing trap, a technological advantage that secured the walls of Constantinople for over 700 years. The secret of its creation was guarded with a paranoia befitting its power. Knowledge was compartmentalized, with different artisans responsible for separate components of the formula, and the emperors themselves treated the recipe as the ultimate state secret. This absolute secrecy was its greatest strength in the short term, and its ultimate undoing in the long term. When the Byzantine Empire finally fell in the 15th century, the precise formula for Greek fire fell with it, lost in the chaos of a collapsing civilization. Modern researchers have spent decades trying to reverse engineer this legendary substance. Analysis of historical texts points to a likely base of crude petroleum, or naphtha, collected from natural surface wells, mixed with pine resin to make it sticky, and perhaps combined with quicklime, a substance that heats violently when exposed to water, which would explain its fearsome reaction on the sea. Yet every modern reconstruction is an educated guess. The exact ratios, the specific additives, the precise preparation method, all of that intimate, hands-on knowledge evaporated from the historical record. The story of Greek fire is a profound lesson in the double-edged sword of secrecy. By protecting the invention so completely, the Byzantines ensured no enemy could copy it, but they also created a single point of catastrophic failure for the knowledge itself. There was no backup copy, no scholarly treatise tucked away in a distant monastery. The chain of transmission was so deliberately narrow that when it was severed, the light went out for good. Centuries later, militaries would have to independently develop incendiary weapons like napalm, essentially reinventing a terrifying wheel that had already been forged and then lost in the ancient world. This first lost invention sets a haunting theme. Sometimes we protect our greatest secrets so well that we end up burying them forever. From a weapon of war, we turn to a device of profound peace and intellect, found not in an imperial armory but at the bottom of the sea. In the year 1900, sponge divers off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera stumbled upon a shipwreck, a treasure trove of marble and bronze statues from the 1st century before the Common Era. Among the artifacts hauled from the deep was a corroded, lumpy mass of bronze that seemed unremarkable at first. It was only years later, as the crust began to flake away, that researchers saw the glint of something extraordinary: precise gear teeth, meticulously cut by hand over 2,000 years ago. This was the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek analog computer of breathtaking complexity. Its purpose was not destruction, but understanding, a hand-cranked model of the cosmos built to predict the movements of the sun, moon, and planets, to forecast eclipses, and to track the cycles of athletic games like the Olympics. This was not a simple calendar, it was a portable planetarium, embodying the Hellenistic world's advanced grasp of celestial mechanics. The sophistication of its gear trains, including a differential gear, a component not seen again until the automobile, suggests a whole lost tradition of precision engineering. So what happened to this knowledge? The technology faded with the cultural shifts of the expanding Roman Empire, where practical engineering for architecture and warfare often took precedence over this kind of intricate philosophical instrumentation. The specialized craft communities that could produce such devices likely dwindled, and the texts describing their construction were lost or ignored. For over a millennium, the very concept of a mechanical computer vanished from the Western world. It was not until the great cathedral clocks of the 14th century, and later the ornate astronomical clocks of the Renaissance, that Europe independently reinvented such complex geared machinery. The Antikythera mechanism stands as a silent, corroded witness to a road not taken, a staggering gap in our technological lineage. It forces us to ask how many other seeds of scientific ambition were left to wither on the vine, their potential unrealized for centuries. This device proves that the ancient mind was capable of conceptual and mechanical leaps we once thought impossible for their time, a reminder that progress can be a story of forgetting as much as one of discovery. The Pantheon in Rome has stood under an open sky for nearly 2,000 years. Its vast, unsupported concrete dome, a feat modern engineers still marvel at, has weathered earthquakes, pollution, and the relentless passage of time without steel reinforcement. This endurance is no accident of history. It is the direct result of a forgotten recipe, a superior ancient technology known as Roman concrete. While our modern concrete often crumbles within decades, especially in harsh saltwater environments, Roman harbors and piers remain partially intact today, submerged for centuries and yet growing stronger. The secret was not in the strength of the stone, but in the clever chemistry of the mortar that bound it all together. The Romans perfected a mixture using lime and a special volcanic ash called pozzolana, mined from regions like Pozzuoli. When this ash mixed with lime and seawater, It triggered a long-term chemical reaction. Instead of simply drying and hardening like modern Portland cement, Roman concrete undergoes a continuous process of crystallization. Tiny plate-like minerals form within its microscopic structure, actually filling in any tiny cracks that begin to develop. In essence, this ancient material possesses a form of self-healing. For the bustling ports of the Roman Empire, this was a revolutionary advantage, creating maritime infrastructure that was virtually maintenance-free and could last for ages. So how did such a practical, world-changing formula simply vanish? The decline was gradual, tied to the fragmentation of the empire itself. The vast trade networks that supplied specific volcanic ash from certain regions broke down. The specialized guilds of builders and architects who guarded and transmitted this hands-on knowledge dispersed or faded away. As large-scale imperial projects ceased, the need for such durable, marine-grade concrete diminished. Medieval builders working on a smaller scale with local materials reverted to simpler, weaker lime mortars. The profound understanding of pozzolanic chemistry faded into obscurity, becoming more legend than practical craft. For over a millennium, architectural durability took a massive step backward. Structures built in the centuries after Rome's fall simply could not match the longevity of their predecessors. It was not until the 20th century, with the advent of advanced materials science and electron microscopes, that researchers could finally peer into the microstructure of Roman concrete samples. They discovered the key was not just the ingredients, but the specific reaction with seawater, a process we are now striving to replicate in modern labs to create more resilient infrastructure. The loss of Roman concrete is a quiet but monumental story. It demonstrates that progress in practical, everyday technology is not guaranteed, and that the most valuable knowledge is sometimes the most vulnerable, disappearing not with a bang, but with the slow silence of forgotten practice. The strength of a civilization can be measured by the materials it masters. Centuries after the Roman concrete piers were laid, another material reached a legendary status, not for building cities but for defending them. Damascus steel swords were whispered about with a reverence that bordered on myth. Forged in the workshops of the Middle East between the 3rd and 17th centuries, these were not mere weapons, they were works of art and engineering. Their blades possessed a paradoxical combination of terrifying sharpness that could slice a falling silk scarf, and a resilient flexibility that could absorb the shock of a brutal parry without shattering. And they were beautiful, each one etched with a distinctive, watery pattern like wood grain or rippling silk, a signature born from the metal's very soul. This was not surface decoration, it was a visual map of the blade's extraordinary internal structure. The secret began far from the forges of Damascus, with lumps of raw material called wootz steel, imported from specific mines in southern India. This ore contained trace impurities like vanadium that were crucial. The master smiths would melt this steel in small clay crucibles, then cool and forge it through a specific, closely guarded cycle of heating, hammering, and cooling. This painstaking process, passed down through generations of artisans, did something miraculous. It forced carbon within the steel to form into microscopic structures that would only be understood over 1,000 years later. When modern scientists finally examined slivers of an authentic Damascus blade under electron microscopes, they found carbon nanotubes, incredibly strong cylindrical structures of carbon atoms, woven seamlessly into the steel matrix. This was nanotechnology achieved in a charcoal-fired forge. So how does such a transformative technique vanish? The loss was likely a perfect storm of practical disruptions. The specific Indian ore sources may have become depleted or inaccessible due to shifting trade routes and political changes. The guilds of smiths, whose knowledge was an oral tradition of feel, sight, and sound, could have been dispersed by conflict or economic decline. Without the right raw materials, the exact craft could not be replicated, and the nuanced art of the process faded from living memory. For centuries, European swordsmiths tried in vain to copy the watery pattern through surface etching or by laminating different steels, creating what we now call pattern-welded steel. These are beautiful blades in their own right, but they are an homage, a superficial imitation of the deep material genius of true Damascus. The relentless quest to solve this ancient puzzle, however, did not end in failure. It drove centuries of metallurgical experimentation, pushing scientists and blacksmiths to better understand carbon, crystal structures, and alloying. The ghost of Damascus steel, a material lost to time, thus became a powerful muse, proving that the pursuit of a forgotten past can actively illuminate the path to our future. The true cost of lost knowledge is not measured in single inventions, but in entire libraries of thought. No symbol of this intellectual catastrophe looms larger than the Great Library of Alexandria. More than a building, it was the brain of the ancient world, a deliberate project to gather every known scroll on every known subject, from the mechanics of Hero of Alexandria to the medical theories of Herophilus, from precise star charts to speculative geography. Its halls were meant to be an eternal engine of human understanding, where scholars could cross-reference Egyptian mathematics with Greek philosophy and Babylonian astronomy. The loss of the library, therefore, was not one event but a slow, tragic unraveling over centuries, through a series of fires and conflicts that chipped away at its collections until little remained. This gradual destruction meant that foundational texts did not vanish in a single dramatic blaze, but faded from memory, their contents known only by fleeting references in the works of later authors who were lucky enough to have seen them. Imagine a modern researcher trying to rebuild quantum physics using only the footnotes in a popular science magazine, and you begin to grasp the magnitude of the gap. The works of Hero alone, describing steam engines, automated temple doors, and intricate mechanical theaters, survive only in fragments. His full vision for applied engineering was essentially erased. This catastrophic dispersal forced a profound reset. Scholars during the Islamic Golden Age and later thinkers of the European Renaissance had to painstakingly rediscover or rederive scientific and mathematical principles from scratch. They were often working with copies of copies, translated through multiple languages with the original context and clarity stripped away. Progress became a game of intellectual archaeology, digging through the rubble of the past to find shards of insight. The fate of the Library of Alexandria underscores a chilling vulnerability in human civilization. Our collective memory is fragile. When a central hub of knowledge is destroyed, the connections between ideas are severed. The chain of transmission breaks, and centuries can be spent merely trying to return to a starting point that our ancestors had already reached. This loss echoes forward, a silent shadow over history, reminding us that the greatest invention we can ever possess is the shared, protected, and actively used repository of all we have learned. The fragility of knowledge is one thing, but its deliberate destruction is another. A curious story passed down from ancient Rome hints at a technology so disruptive it was allegedly smothered in its cradle. The historians Pliny the Elder and Petronius recount a tale of an unnamed artisan who presented the Emperor Tiberius with a remarkable gift, a drinking bowl made of glass. In a dramatic demonstration, the inventor threw the vessel onto the stone floor. Instead of shattering into 100 pieces, the bowl merely dented, and with a few taps from a small hammer, it was restored to its original shape. This was vitrum flexile, flexible glass. According to the legend, Tiberius, after his initial amazement, asked a pointed question whether anyone else knew this secret. Assured that the inventor alone possessed the knowledge, the emperor reportedly had the man executed on the spot. The stated reason was economic fear, that such a material would render gold and silver tableware worthless, crashing the value of the imperial treasury. Whether this specific event is historical fact or a moral fable about the dangers of innovation in an autocratic state, the underlying message is profound. It illustrates a different mechanism of loss, not from the slow decay of institutions or the chaos of conflict, but from a conscious, top-down decision to erase a discovery. A potential path in material science was deliberately blocked because it threatened existing power structures. The story resonates because we can see the logic, even if it is chilling. In a society built on the prestige and permanence of precious metals, a substance that was both beautiful and nearly indestructible could indeed destabilize an entire economic and social order. The secret of flexible glass, if it ever existed in that form, died with its creator, leaving only a tantalizing footnote in history. For centuries, the very idea remained in the realm of fantasy. It was not until the modern era, with the entirely separate development of plastics like celluloid and polycarbonate, and later with tempered safety glass which gains strength through controlled stress, that we achieved the functional equivalent of that legendary Roman bowl. The tale forces us to confront an uncomfortable possibility. How many other innovations were lost not to accident, but to active suppression? How many inventors saw their work dismissed, confiscated, or destroyed because it was too inconvenient for the rulers of the day? This is a loss born not of fragility, but of fear. A reminder that progress requires not just brilliant minds, but a society willing to accept the change their brilliance brings. A single thread of silk could determine the fate of empires. For over 3,000 years, the civilization of China held a monopoly on the most coveted fabric in the ancient world, not merely through trade, but through an impenetrable wall of secrecy. The process of sericulture, transforming the humble Bomix mori silkworm from caterpillar to cocoon to shimmering thread, was a state secret of the highest order, guarded with a severity comparable to modern nuclear codes. Knowledge of the full cycle, from mulberry tree cultivation to the delicate art of reeling the fine filament from the boiled cocoon, was restricted. Smuggling silkworm eggs or larvae out of the empire was a crime punishable by death. This absolute control created a technological dark age for the rest of the world, a deliberate gap in human capability. Other cultures knew the glorious end product. They felt its lightness and saw its sheen, but the means of its creation were an unreachable mystery. They were forced to rely on inferior alternatives like rough flax, heavy wool, or expensive cotton, while silk flowed west along trade routes like liquid wealth, shaping economies and diplomacy for millennia. The monopoly was finally broken not by trade but by espionage. In the 6th century, the story goes, 2 Nestorian monks smuggled silkworm eggs to the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, hiding them within hollow bamboo canes. This act of technological theft transferred the secret to the West, allowing the Byzantine Empire to establish its own silk industry. Yet this story of diffusion masks a deeper truth about loss. In regions that later gained the knowledge, local silk industries were astonishingly fragile. If conflict, disease, or social upheaval disrupted the careful, multi-generational craft communities who understood the precise rhythms of the worms, the entire complex system could collapse within a generation. The knowledge wasn't just written down, it was a living practice, a symphony of timing and touch. When that practice was interrupted, the technology didn't just regress, it vanished locally, forcing a painful and expensive process of reacquisition, often requiring new acts of espionage or inviting foreign experts. The silk secret exemplifies a profound idea that knowledge can be imprisoned by geopolitics. China's brilliant innovation created a centuries-long head start, but the very act of hoarding that knowledge meant that for much of human history, most people on Earth were denied not just a luxury, but an entire branch of material science. It was an artificial scarcity of know-how, a reminder that progress is not just about discovery, but about access. When that access is severed, whether by walls or by war, the light of innovation dims, not for lack of brilliance elsewhere, but simply because the gates to the garden are locked. Comfort itself became a casualty of history. In the villas of wealthy Romans and the vast public baths that were the heart of social life, a hidden technology guaranteed warmth even in the depths of winter, the Hypocaust system. This was not merely a fireplace in the corner, it was an architectural revolution, a form of central heating engineered into the very bones of a building. The principle was elegant in its execution. A furnace, often stoked by slaves or servants in a separate service room, would generate intense heat. This heat was then channeled through a carefully designed void beneath the raised floors of the rooms above, which were supported by a grid of short, sturdy brick pillars. The hot air and gases would circulate through these hollow spaces, gently warming the solid tile or stone floor above before escaping up through terracotta flues embedded within the walls. The result was a consistent, radiant warmth that rose evenly through the room, heating the space without filling it with smoke or requiring a dangerous open flame in the living area. For the sprawling public baths, this was a marvel of public health and civic engineering, allowing for vast, steamy hot rooms and comfortably warm changing areas that served entire communities. The Hypocaust represented a profound understanding of thermodynamics and masonry, a commitment to comfort and sanitation that would not be seen again on such a scale for over 1,000 years. Its disappearance was a slow, structural unraveling. The Hypocaust was not a standalone appliance, it was a symptom of a highly organized, resource-rich society. It required specialized craftsmen who understood bricklaying, airflow, and heat retention. It demanded a steady supply of fuel, often wood or charcoal, delivered via managed estates or trade networks. Most critically, it needed the large-scale, coordinated construction projects that defined the Roman architectural spirit. As the empire's political and economic unity fractured, the complex infrastructure that made such luxurious systems feasible also crumbled. The great baths fell into disrepair, the villas were abandoned or repurposed, and the specialized knowledge of the Hypocaust masters was no longer in demand. Medieval Europe, turning inward and building on a smaller, more defensive scale, reverted to the central open hearth. While a hearth provided heat and a place to cook, it was profoundly inefficient, wasting most of its warmth up the chimney while leaving the outer edges of a room cold and drafty. It also filled living spaces with smoke, impacting respiratory health and darkening interiors with soot. The loss of the Hypocaust meant a regression in daily quality of life, a return to a colder, darker, and less healthy domestic environment for centuries. The principle of radiant floor heating was independently rediscovered much later, notably in the elaborate systems of some Korean ondol floors, and much later in the water-based pipe systems of modern central heating. We had to relearn a simple, brilliant truth that the most effective warmth is the one that surrounds you silently from below, a lesson the Romans had mastered and then left buried beneath the cold floors of a forgotten age. The warmth of a Roman villa, however, could not heal every kind of pain. Deep within one of the oldest stories of our civilization lies the ghost of a different kind of comfort, a chemical solace lost to the ages. In Homer's Odyssey, the wise Helen of Troy does something extraordinary for her grieving guests. She mixes a mysterious substance into their wine, a drug called Nepenthe. The ancient text tells us this potion held the power to banish all sorrow and memory of pain, a pharmaceutical miracle that allowed a person to weep without feeling the sting of their own tears. This was not mere poetic metaphor. It was a detailed description of a potent psychoactive agent, a specific recipe mentioned with the certainty of a known remedy. Yet today, Nepenthe is just a beautiful, empty word. Its true identity, the specific plant or combination of herbs that could produce such a targeted emotional oblivion, has evaporated from history. This loss represents more than a missing ingredient. It is a rupture in an entire lineage of empirical healing. Ancient physicians and shamans operated not with modern chemistry, but with a deep, generational intimacy with the natural world. They knew which root, when prepared with a certain bark and taken at a precise dose, could ease a specific type of suffering. The recipe for Nepenthe was part of this vast oral library of botanical knowledge, a library that was incredibly fragile. Wars displaced communities, taking healers from their native flora. Oral traditions were silenced before they could be written down. Plants themselves went extinct, or their uses were simply forgotten as cultures transformed. Scholars today can only speculate. Was it an opiate derived from poppies, a potent wine infused with henbane or mandrake, or a unique blend of regional herbs whose synergistic effect we can no longer replicate? Each guess is a testament to our ignorance. The profound consequence is that modern medicine had to start from a near blank slate. The intuitive, experiential path that led an ancient healer to Nepenthe was closed. Instead, for centuries, humanity grappled with the raw agony of grief and mental anguish without a reliable, understood palliative. The long, scientific journey to isolate morphine, to synthesize aspirin, and later to develop modern antidepressants was not a continuation of an ancient tradition. It was a desperate, independent reinvention. We had to build a whole new language of chemistry to slowly and painstakingly rediscover what some forgotten practitioner, millennia ago, might have known from the whispered secrets of the earth itself. The story of Nepenthe asks a haunting question: how many other gentle keys to the human mind did we once hold, only to drop them in the dark corridors of time? The open sea under a heavy gray sky offered no horizon, no landmark, only an endless, shifting plain of water. Yet the Vikings, according to their own sagas, sailed these featureless stretches with a confidence that baffled later historians. Their secret was not just courage, but a crystal. Old Norse texts speak of a solarstein, a sunstone, a magical-seeming tool that could reveal the hidden sun's position even through complete cloud cover, or in the dim twilight of the polar summer. For centuries, this was dismissed as mere legend, a poetic metaphor for skill or luck. But modern science has revealed it was likely a brilliant application of a natural phenomenon, using a transparent crystal of Iceland spar, a form of calcite. This crystal has a unique property: it polarizes light. When you look through it and rotate it, the crystal appears to brighten and darken depending on its alignment with the polarization pattern of sunlight scattered by the atmosphere. Even on a completely overcast day, this subtle pattern still exists. A skilled navigator could hold the stone up to the sky, rotate it until it achieved a certain clarity or darkness, and thereby pinpoint the sun's bearing with remarkable accuracy, creating an invisible reference point across the empty ocean. This was not magic, it was advanced empirical optics, a hands-on science born from generations of observation and practice. The knowledge did not vanish in a cataclysm, but through simple, quiet obsolescence. As magnetic compasses spread through Europe, this delicate, skill-based method fell out of favor. The intimate craft of reading the sky through a crystal was no longer taught to new sailors. It became a curious footnote in the sagas, its practical truth fading into myth until researchers in the late 20th century, armed with an understanding of polarization physics, began to test the idea. Experiments, including one using a crystal found in an Elizabethan shipwreck, proved it worked with stunning precision. The Vikings had, in effect, built a celestial compass from a stone, a tool that gave them a navigational window the rest of the world lacked. Its loss is a different kind of lesson. Here, an entire civilization did not fall. The technology simply became unnecessary. It was a superior solution to a specific problem that ceased to be a problem, or was solved by a simpler tool. The specialized sensory skill required to use the sunstone was not written down in a manual. It lived in the hands and eyes of the navigator. When those hands were gone, the knowledge evaporated, leaving only a cryptic name in an old story. We had to fully understand the science of light polarization centuries later to even believe such a feat was possible, let alone reinvent the principle for modern optical instruments. The Sunstone reminds us that the most sophisticated technology can sometimes be the most silent and the most easily left behind when the world decides to turn a different way. A different kind of language hung from the belts of Inca administrators, a language made not of ink and paper, but of color, knot, and chord. This was the Quipu, a sophisticated data storage device constructed from a main cord from which hung dozens, sometimes hundreds, of subsidiary strings in a cascading array. Each element was a deliberate piece of information: the type of fiber, the color of the string, the specific placement of the knot, and the complex way knots were tied, all combined to encode numbers with decimal precision. They were the empire's ledgers recording census data, tribute payments, and the vast stores of the state, warehouses with an accuracy that astounded the Spanish conquistadors who encountered them. But the Quipu was potentially far more than an accounting tool. Some researchers believe these intricate textiles could also have recorded narratives, laws, and histories, forming a complete three-dimensional writing system without a single written character. This was information technology built from texture and geometry, a parallel path in the human story of communication that did not rely on the flat page. Its loss was not accidental, it was systematic. The Spanish conquest aimed to dismantle the Inca administrative state and replace it with European models. The Quipucamayos, the trained keepers and readers of the cords, were marginalized, their authority stripped away. As the old system collapsed, the living, oral tradition that gave meaning to the complex knots was severed. The physical quipus survived as curious artifacts, but the key to their full meaning faded into silence. Today, hundreds of these enigmatic objects sit in museums, beautiful and mute. Modern scholars, using computational analysis and comparing Quipu structures with early Spanish colonial documents that may have been transcribed from them, are painstakingly working to crack their code. They have confirmed the numerical system, understanding how the position and type of knot represent units, tens, hundreds, and so on. But the potential for narrative, the stories they might tell, remains just out of reach. This ongoing decipherment is itself a kind of reinvention, an attempt to rebuild a lost information architecture from its skeletal remains. The tragedy of the Quipu is the loss of an entire way of thinking about data. It challenges our very definition of writing and record-keeping, proving that complex thought can be encoded in forms far beyond alphabets. In a fascinating parallel, the binary logic of knots, their presence or absence, their specific sequence and placement, conceptually mirrors the fundamental language of modern computing, where all information is reduced to ones and zeros. The Inca, in their way, may have been weaving a physical prototype of a digital database. Their lost language of knots forces us to wonder how many other profound systems for organizing knowledge have vanished simply because they did not look like the systems that came to dominate the world. Sunlight itself could be forged into a weapon. That was the astonishing claim made about the great mathematician and inventor Archimedes during the siege of Syracuse. Centuries after the event, authors wrote that he had orchestrated a defense so ingenious it seemed to bend nature to his will, using an array of highly polished bronze shields or mirrors. These were arranged to reflect and concentrate the sun's rays onto the wooden hulls of the approaching Roman fleet, focusing the energy to a single, burning point until the ships caught fire. Whether this dramatic account is historical fact or a powerful legend born from the awe surrounding a genius, its significance lies not in its veracity, but in the idea it represents. It describes a speculative invention, a radical application of optical principles that was never formally developed or recorded as a transferable technology. The knowledge of how to effectively engineer such a system calculating the precise curvature, alignment, and scale needed to achieve combustion at a distance, was not pursued or written down in a way that could be passed on. It remained a brilliant spark of a thought, a what-if scenario recounted as a story rather than a documented experiment. For nearly 2 millennia, Archimedes' heat ray lived in this ambiguous space between myth and lost science. It was a tantalizing ghost of a possibility, a thread of inventive thought that was dropped. The concept of harnessing concentrated solar energy as a tool simply vanished from the practical engineering world, because the social and military conditions that might have spurred its development passed. It wasn't until the age of modern experimental science that the idea was seriously revisited. In the 18th and 19th centuries, researchers began testing the principle, with some demonstrations successfully igniting wood at short distances. These experiments proved the physics was sound, but also revealed the immense practical challenges of scaling it to a reliable weapon. This long journey from legend to laboratory, however, did not end in a dead end. The relentless curiosity sparked by the ancient story directly contributed to the foundational research behind contemporary concentrated solar power technology. Today, vast fields of mirrors focus sunlight onto towers to generate clean electricity, a peaceful and profound realization of that ancient speculative dream. The tale of the heat ray, therefore, is a story about losing not an object but a trajectory of thought. It shows how a single innovative concept, when it isn't integrated into the living body of knowledge, can fade into folklore, forcing future generations to rediscover the path on their own, guided only by the faint echo of an old story. A small clay jar, no larger than a hand, sat undisturbed in the sands near Baghdad for nearly 2,000 years. Inside, archaeologists in the 1930s found a puzzling assembly, a rolled copper sheet forming a cylinder, an iron rod suspended at its center, and traces of a now vanished acidic substance like vinegar or wine. This unassuming artifact, known today as the Baghdad Battery, presents one of history's most electrifying mysteries. Could it have been a primitive galvanic cell, a simple battery capable of generating a small electric current? The chemistry is undeniably plausible. If the jar was filled with an acidic electrolyte, the dissimilar metals, copper and iron, would create a voltage difference, a basic electrochemical reaction. Replicas built to these specifications have indeed produced a low but measurable current, around 1 to 2 volts, enough for a faint tingle or a subtle shimmer. So what possible use could such a faint spark have held in the ancient Parthian or Sasanian world? The most compelling theories are as elegant as they are speculative. Some researchers propose it was used for electroplating, to deposit a thin layer of gold or silver onto other metal objects. A series of these cells connected together could provide enough current for a small-scale gilding process, explaining how certain artifacts from the period show plating too fine and uniform for traditional fire gilding techniques. Others suggest a medicinal or ritual purpose, perhaps used to create a mild numbing sensation for acupuncture-like treatments, or to generate awe in a temple ceremony. The profound implication is staggering. This object hints at a fleeting, localized grasp of a fundamental force of nature, electricity, centuries before it was formally understood and named. Yet there is no chain of evidence, no progression. We find no wires, no switches, no manuals describing its use. It is a solitary data point, an isolated spark that failed to catch fire in the intellectual tinder of its time. The knowledge of how to generate and perhaps even utilize this current was not developed, shared, or built upon. It remained a curious artifact, its purpose dying with its creator, its potential unrealized. The principle had to be completely rediscovered from a blank slate by Alessandro Volta in the late 18th century, with his pile of alternating zinc and copper discs. The Baghdad Battery, therefore, is not proof of ancient electrical grids but something far more poignant. it is a testament to the random, fragile nature of discovery itself. It suggests that advanced understanding can flicker into existence in isolated pockets, only to be snuffed out by a lack of context, communication, or simply the pressing needs of daily survival. This single jar challenges the very core of our linear, upward view of history. Progress is not a relay race where the baton is cleanly passed forward. Sometimes the baton is dropped, and the next runner must start the race all over again, unaware that the track had ever been run before. The faint hum of a battery is one thing, but the soaring voice of a violin is another entirely. In a quiet workshop in Cremona, Italy, during the late 17th century, Antonio Stradivari was not just building instruments, he was capturing lightning in a wooden box. The violins that bear his name are not merely antiques, they are sonic legends possessing a tone so rich, so complex, and so powerfully resonant that they have defined the sound of classical music for centuries. While the master's skill in carving and shaping wood is undeniable, a persistent mystery clings to his creations, the secret of the final, gleaming coat. The varnish on a Stradivarius violin is not a simple sealant, it is an integral part of the instrument's soul. This unique coating, a complex recipe of oils, resins, and pigments, is believed to have performed a delicate acoustic ballet. It protected the wood from moisture and wear, yet it was supple enough to allow the delicate spruce and maple to vibrate freely. Some theories suggest it subtly altered the wood's density or damping properties, filtering harsh overtones and enhancing the warm, singing quality that makes these violins so distinctive. It was the final, alchemical step in a years-long process, a craft secret guarded as closely as any state formula, and like so many guarded secrets, it vanished with its keepers. Despite Stradivari leaving behind hundreds of instruments, he left no written recipe for his varnish. The knowledge lived in his hands, in the timing of the mixture, the specific sources of his materials, perhaps even in the aging process of the oils under the Italian sun. Modern scientists have subjected these violins to every non-invasive test imaginable, from spectrography to electron microscopy. They have identified some components, like common resins and pigments available in 18th century Italy, but the precise formula, the exact preparation, and the nuanced application technique remain locked in the past. The quest to solve this mystery has driven centuries of innovation in its own right. Luthiers and chemists, striving to recreate that lost perfection, have pioneered new synthetic varnishes, developed a deeper understanding of wood acoustics, and refined finishing techniques for modern instruments. Yet every attempt is an homage, not a reproduction. A contemporary violin can be technically flawless, but that last, elusive percent of magic, the so-called Stradivarius sound, is attributed to the ghost in the varnish. This loss is particularly poignant because it is so recent. We are not talking about the fall of Rome or a sunken library, but about a craft tradition that faded within the well-documented era of the Enlightenment. It shows that mastery is not just about knowledge, but about the intangible touch, the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime in a specific workshop, with specific materials under a specific sky. When that individual chain of transmission is broken, something unique passes from the world, not because we lack the science to analyze it, but because we lack the lived experience to truly recreate it. The silent recipe of Stradivari's varnish whispers a final, elegant lesson that some of humanity's highest achievements are not just inventions, but irreplaceable performances, a fleeting harmony between a person, their materials, and their moment in time. The final silent recipe may have been a defense against a different kind of death. In the 1st century before the Common Era, a king lived in constant fear of assassination by poison, a common political tool of his time. Mithridates VI of Pontus, a ruler locked in a lifelong struggle with Rome, turned his paranoia into a legendary experiment. He dedicated himself to the creation of a universal protector, a compound he called Mithridatium. Through what ancient sources describe as years of cautious self-experimentation with non-lethal doses of various toxic substances, he sought to build an immunity within his own body, a concept startlingly ahead of its time. His final formula was said to be a complex amalgam of over 50 ingredients, including opium, chopped vipers, and myriad herbs and spices, all compounded into a thick paste or electuary. The legend held that by taking a small, daily dose of this concoction, one could become invulnerable to a vast array of poisons. After his defeat, the recipe was taken to Rome, where it fascinated physicians like Galen, who modified and prescribed it for emperors, transforming it from a personal defense into a celebrated, if mysterious, panacea. For centuries, Mithridatium represented the pinnacle of a specific kind of empirical pharmacy, a brute force approach to immunity built on observation and tradition rather than understanding. Its loss was not a single event, but a slow fading of credibility. As the Roman world transitioned into the medieval period, the precise, nuanced knowledge of how to prepare and standardize such a complex formula dissipated. Without the structured medical institutions of Rome, the recipe fragmented into countless local variants, each less effective than the last, its original logic forgotten. It devolved from a specific, if speculative, protocol into a general cure-all tonic, its reputation sustained more by myth than by measurable result. The profound consequence was that the entire intuitive pathway it represented, the idea of building systemic resistance through gradual exposure, was abandoned and discredited for over a millennium. The modern world had to build an entirely new scientific framework, the fields of immunology and toxicology, from the ground up to rediscover the principle. Vaccination, antitoxins, and modern antidotes are not descendants of Mithridatium. They are independent reinventions of a core concept that was lost when its original, messy, empirical vessel broke. We had to learn through microscopes and controlled trials what one paranoid king tried to learn through personal trial and error. This final loss underscores a recurring theme, that the value of an ancient invention often lies not in the object itself, but in the direction of thought it represents. When that thought is scattered, we are left not just without the recipe, but without the map, forced to find the destination all over again by an entirely different route. The true legacy of these 15 stories is not a collection of museum pieces, but a powerful warning written across the centuries. Human knowledge is not a permanent monument. It is a living flame, one that must be carefully fed and shielded, or it will flicker and vanish into the dark. We have seen this flame snuffed out in countless ways, by the deliberate secrecy that buried Greek fire, by the economic collapse that let Roman concrete crumble from memory, by the conquests that silenced the keepers of the Quipu, and by the simple, quiet obsolescence that made the Viking Sunstone a forgotten legend. Each loss, from the self-healing harbors to the nano-structured steel, teaches us the same sobering lesson. Our greatest innovations are astonishingly fragile. They depend not just on a brilliant mind, but on a society stable enough to preserve them, a culture curious enough to teach them, and a chain of transmission resilient enough to carry them forward. When any link in that chain breaks, the light goes out, sometimes for 1,000 years. Yet within this pattern of fragility lies a parallel story of breathtaking resilience, the human drive to rediscover. We are a species compelled to solve puzzles, to fill in the blanks of our own history. The ghost of Damascus steel drove centuries of metallurgy. The myth of Archimedes' mirror helped focus modern solar power. The silent enigma of the Baghdad battery reminds us that discovery can spark in isolation, waiting for a future generation to fan it into a proper flame. These cycles of loss and reinvention are not just historical footnotes, they are the very rhythm of our intellectual journey. They should inspire in us a profound sense of stewardship for the knowledge we hold today. Our digital archives, our open scientific journals, our global collaborations, these are the new libraries of Alexandria we must actively maintain and protect. They are our best defense against another long, dark age of forgetting. So let this exploration end not with an ending, but with an invitation to curiosity. What other forgotten marvels are waiting in plain sight, tucked into a faded manuscript or resting just beneath the soil? Which of these lost inventions, from the flexible glass of a paranoid emperor to the soothing potion of Nepenthe, sparks your imagination the most? Share your thoughts below and join us as we continue to uncover the great, unfinished mysteries of our shared past.